Good morning and welcome everyone to the third edition of AESCON, Asia-Europe Sustainable Connectivity, and entitled this year, Shaping Asia-Europe Pathways for Human-Centric and Resilient Digital Connectivity. AESCON is a meeting place for discussion on Asia-Europe sustainable connectivity, bringing together policy analysts, government representatives, and private sector and other stakeholders, with a particular focus on Asian-Europe connectivity. This third edition aims at building on the success and recommendation of the second AESCON held in March 2022 and the first edition held in 2020. Within the next 2 days, we will have the opportunity to hear from leading experts on regional interest and human rights to cybersecurity and disaster preparedness. This event has been made possible thanks to the support of the European Union in cooperation with Asia-Europe Foundation based in Singapore and CEPS based in Brussels, and in particular, and in partnership with Sejong Institute in Seoul and the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia area in Jakarta. One mention of housekeeping rules: the session will be recorded and you will find the recording and the report on the website within a couple of days. I would now, without any further ado, like to invite the keynote speaker for the welcome remarks, starting with the Deputy Secretary General for Economic and Global Issues in the European External Action Service, EEAS, Ms. Helena Koenig. Ms. Helena, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefania, and also from me, a warm welcome to this third ASCON conference. Here, I don't have to tell you how important it is to discuss the current and future opportunities for digital connectivity between Asia and Europe and how we can work together. We all know that the digital and technological space will be a critical component of the geopolitical discussion and competition as we go forward. The way we take our approach to these topics will really define our economies and our societies in the 21st century. Addressing the digital divide, I think, has never been more important between countries, but also inside countries, and it's of the interest to all of us. Our approach here may differ, our vision may differ, but I think it is clear that we all know that having regions lagging behind or people remaining offline is something which will divide our societies even more, and it will be detrimental to human and economic development. So we need to work to ensure that a human-centric and human rights-based approach is an indispensable element when we shape global connectivity and digital governance. From the EU side, we are convinced that we can together build a governance model that ensures that digital connectivity benefits all citizens. We will continue to work with our partners, respond to their requests for engagement and investments, and we will continue to support digital deployment of infrastructure and services. We believe if we want to do this good, we need to define and implement projects that will deliver state-of-the-art, secure, and trusted digital connectivity, be it cables, satellites, data centers, for example. This is the context in which Europe and Asia joint efforts will have a particular relevance for human-centric connectivity and sustainability. One area of critical importance is standardization. Standardization is also important because of the rapid technological evolution and the ever-emerging issues, and I think we've seen that in this year more than ever. We from the EU side are working with many partners on emerging technology standards and on how to protect sensitive technologies. But it's absolutely clear that we need to do more together, in particular 3 areas that I would like to highlight. First, we need to ensure that global internet governance is based on a multi-stakeholder approach. We need to continue our active engagement in the promotion of the internet as an open, global, free, interoperable, and decentralized network of networks. Secondly, we need to strengthen our ecosystems for digital innovation and make sure that our frameworks are mutually reinforcing. And thirdly, we need to accelerate our collaboration on globally advancing secure ICTS connectivity. Regarding the future of the internet, we believe that the next 2 years, with many overlapping multilateral processes, will be vital for safeguarding the multilateral, multi-stakeholder approach and avoiding a fragmented internet with a strong state-led governance, the so-called split internet. A good diplomatic tool was achieved this year and with the Declaration of the Future of the Internet, which was adopted by the EU and its member states, along with the US and many Asian. We are determined to keep it relevant, both in terms of implementation of the principles and enlarging the participant base. As you also know, in the last few years, the EU has made a lot of progress in our internal digital regulatory agenda. We welcome the debate on what many call the Brussels effect, but as a matter of fact, even if it was not the intention from our side, GDPR has indeed become a global standard for privacy. Now, there are a number of new elements, such as the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, and the Artificial Intelligence Act, which is a second wave of measures that can be as well a source of inspiration for lawmaking and standard-setting bodies around the world. And we are very happy to continue to discuss those initiatives with our partners. There is a lot of room for Asian and European partners to leverage critical and emerging technologies, and at the same time strengthening our engagement and promotion of regulatory convergence. This is in essence what we're trying to achieve with our digital partnerships. We do understand that we may hold different views on how to regulate specific issues, but we do share many of the underlying concerns, including on the market dominance of some tech companies. And I hope this conference will bring us closer in identifying and shaping solutions. We also believe that there are promising prospects for exploring connectivity investments in the Indo-Pacific. We have taken the first steps from the EU side within the framework of the Global Gateway, as we launched a project which aims at increasing regional connectivity in the Southeast Asian region, with a Copernicus data center in the Philippines. ICTS connectivity hardware from strategic rivals proliferates around the world. We need to set aside our differences and short-term commercial interest and accelerate our cooperation in this area. Let me just conclude with a few words about disaster preparedness and prevention, which is a key area. We welcome very much the leading role that our Asian partners play in this highly strategic and important area. Like you, we believe that technology should also be used to protect the most vulnerable from disasters. This is a crucial element in our approach to the green and digital twin transitions. As the innovative use of digital technologies for climate actions, disaster resilience, and environmental sustainability are gaining momentum, we need to further step out our joint efforts and explore possible areas for cooperation in specific areas which really lead to real deliverables. Finally, I would like to echo what Stefania, you did in the beginning. Thanks a lot to our partners, the Center for European Policy Studies, CEPS in Brussels, the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia area in Jakarta, and the Sejong Institute in Seoul. And finally, a specific and special thanks to the Asia-Europe Foundation, ASEP, in Singapore for their support. I take also the opportunity to congratulate them with on their 25th anniversary, which is actually exactly how long as I've been working with Southeast Asia in the Commission and the EAS now. The focus to bring peoples of Asia and Europe together is has never been more important than it is today. And it deserves all our support now and in the many years to come. So with that, I'm very pleased to pass the floor on to the Executive Director, but first back to you, Stefania. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And thanks for setting the tone for the discussion of the next couple of days and highlighting some of the objectives. And we will do our best to cover them all. But indeed, I would like now to invite the Executive Director of Asia for Europe Foundation, ASEF, Ambassador Toru Morikawa, to share his keynote remarks. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for the very kind words, Madam Director General. Distinguished guests, esteemed participants, ladies and gentlemen. Today marks the beginning of a two-day journey of stimulating discussions, exploring the theme of digital connectivity from the technological as well as human dimensions, an area of mutual interest for both the regions of Asia and Europe. This topic is closely followed by us at the Asia Europe Foundation, ASEF, and it is my utmost pleasure to welcome you all to the third edition of the Asia Europe Sustainable Connectivity Scientific Conference, ISCON. In this ever-evolving global landscape, the connections between Asia and Europe have become more intertwined than ever before. We are witnessing a transformative era driven by digital technologies that connect the world together and shape our societies. It is imperative that we delve into the prospects and challenges posed by this digital revolution in an inclusive and sustainable manner, working together with diverse stakeholders. Collaboration and cooperation among the varied stakeholders remain at the heart of inclusive and shared growth. As we gather here today, we must recognize the importance of learning from each other and fostering strong partnership between Asia and Europe. By creating a peer-to-peer collaborative working and life environment, we can harness the potential of digital connectivity to address common global challenges, focusing particularly on fostering sustainable development, enhancing human rights, and ensuring resilient and secure connectivity. In the post-COVID-19 context, digital connectivity has enabled business and governments to adapt and re-strategize, focusing on joint economic growth, innovation, and sustainable development by driving the decarbonization of global industries, rethinking supply chains and their carbon footprint, and scaling green technologies. Similarly, digital connectivity has provided individuals with opportunities such as online education and research collaborations, virtual cultural and intellectual exchanges, as well as public engagement activities. Such positive development have also been accompanied by rapid advancement in the area of artificial intelligence, AI, which is reshaping numerous aspects of our lives. In this AI-driven digital transformation process, we find ourselves navigating uncharted territories where conventional boundaries are being redefined. AI proficiency, critical thinking, creativity, and emotional intelligence will become indispensable qualities to ensure secure and human-centric digital connectivity. At ASEF, we continue to adapt to the advancement of the digital world and provide opportunities to enhance people-to-people connections across Asia and Europe in this new digital era. In the area of education, ASF Higher Education Innovation Laboratory, ASF InnoLab project offers online training for higher education managers to develop joint action plans concerning universities' role in teaching AI skills and entrepreneurship. The ASF Classroom Network School Collaboration Project offers online training for school teachers working in an AI-driven teaching and learning space. In the area of culture, ASF Culture 360 project provides e-residency and virtual mentorship programs for emerging artists and cultural professionals from Asia and Europe. As digital transformation accelerates, the need to expand internet connectivity, build stronger infrastructure, ensure wider access, and invest in digital literacy programs is essential. Achieving universal connectivity by 2030 is one of the greatest challenges, as currently almost half of the world's population does not have access to the internet. This is particularly evident in developing countries, and it results in not only individuals, but entire communities and businesses being left behind. As we build back better from the pandemic, we must place the human dimension of digital connectivity at the center of technological development. We at ASF reiterate our commitment to further our mission of connecting people and societies across Asia and Europe for their mutual benefit. Ensuring global digital connectivity is achievable, and so I ask all of you, from the public to the private sector, from the local to regional levels, to also contribute towards this effort. I extend my warmest thanks to all partners, the European Union, the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, the Center for European Policy Studies, the Sejong Institute, as well as the distinguished speakers, experts, and participants who have joined us today. Your presence and contribution will enrich the discussions and make this conference a valuable platform for multi-stakeholder bi-regional engagement. I would like to close my remarks with the following quote. The future of digital connectivity between Asia and Europe holds limitless potential, promising unprecedented collaboration, economic growth, and cultural exchange. As technology intertwines our continents, it will pave the way for a new era of innovation, knowledge sharing, and transformative partnerships, shaping a connected world that transcends geographical boundaries. End of quote. This quote was generated by ChatGPT, an AI technology that allows human-like conversations with a chatbot. On that note, I welcome all of you to this peer-to-peer dialogue platform for sharing of innovative ideas through open and analytical discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your remarks that really were quite a highlighting, and also for reminding us of the principles such as inclusivity and sustainability that should be the pillar of our engagement. So thank you for this. I would now like to move to the interactive part of the meeting with the first panel discussion, which is led by our partner AREA on bridging regional interest and global challenges in digital connectivity. So for this, I would like to give the floor and invite the Senior Policy Advisor for International Economic Cooperation in Economic Research from the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia from AREA, Ms. Anita Prakash. Please, Anita, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. A very warm welcome to all the participants at the Asia-Europe Scientific Conference, or ASCON for short. To those who have participated in the two previous versions of this important connectivity and cooperation platform between Asia and Europe. I'm Anita Prakash, Senior Policy Advisor in the Office of the President, Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, and we are located in Jakarta. Those interested can look us up at www.eria.org. So at the very outset, there are a few housekeeping rules for this session and for the conference as a whole. As we are now about to begin the conference, I would like to remind you that your microphones have been turned off by the host. The panel discussion in this session will be followed by a Q&A session, and we invite all of you to leave your questions using the chat function. And for those who are joining this conference for the first time, some background. ASCON was born out of the ASEM Connectivity Monitor that was published and presented at the 12th ASEM Summit in Brussels in 2018. The Connectivity Monitor was prepared through extensive research and consultations on connectivity and cooperation between Asia and Europe. Now, 5 years since its publication and several disruptions to global and regional connectivity and cooperation in the intervening years, the ASCON 3.0 and the session on bridging regional interests and global challenges in digital connectivity, they are both timely and necessary, I dare say even urgent, for ensuring digital connectivity and fostering inclusive societies in Asia and Europe. Without prolonging the introductions any further, let me bring in the distinguished speakers from Asia and Europe who specialize in various aspects of connectivity and cooperation in the digital economy. But at the very outset, we have a keynote address from Dr. Joel Joseph S. Marciano, Jr., Director General, Philippines Space Agency. May I request Dr. Marciano, please, to give his keynote address before we start the next panel. Dr. Marciano, please.
Thank you very much, Anita. I have prepared a few slides. Can we have that displayed? Thank you. A pleasant day to everybody. I'd like to thank the organizers of the Third Asia-Europe Sustainable Connectivity Scientific Conference for this opportunity to deliver this brief message and presentation on the National Copernicus Capacity Support Action Program for the Philippines, or COPPIL, as part of the EU Global Gateway Initiative in the digital sector on behalf of the Philippine Space Agency, or PhilSA, and our partners in the country. Let's go to the next slide. Thank you. On the 24th of April 2023, the Philippine Space Agency, or PhilSA, and the Department of Science and Technology in the Philippines, the European Space Agency, and the European Union delegation in the Philippines launched the COPPIL program, which received a 10 million euro grant funding from the EU. The COPPIL enables better access to Copernicus satellite data and promotes its strategic application for enhancing the Philippines' response capability and resilience amidst challenges brought by natural and man-made disasters. The COPPIL initiative is part of the new Global Gateway strategy of the EU, encouraging the advanced utilization of Copernicus open data and information services, which in turn will support better policy definition, improve planning, increase transparency, commitment, and accountability. It is the first EU cooperation of its kind in this part of the world. Next slide, please. The Copernicus, or the EU's Earth Observation Flagship Program, provides free environment and climate data from a constellation of satellites, the Sentinels, which monitor the Earth and its many ecosystems. Satellite images from Copernicus are open and obtained freely by governments, businesses, international organizations, and the public. In the Philippines, Copernicus satellite images have helped authorities in preparing for typhoons, monitoring volcanic activity, and responding to accidents, such as oil spills. The data helps authorities plan and undertake necessary mitigation and other interventions. The Philippines welcomes this partnership with the European Union as it strengthens the domestic space value chain particularly the ability to process and use satellite images and spaceborne data to be better prepared in the face of disasters and climate change. Next slide. Now, let's go to the next slide. Among the key features of COPPIL is the establishment of a Copernicus mirror site in the Philippines, which will allow access to the Copernicus satellite images on a national scale, which shall extend to a regional coverage in the future. In this regard, the PhilSA will soon be signing a Copernicus administrative arrangement with the EU's Directorate General for Defense Industry and Space, or DG DEFIS, that covers reciprocal data access and exchange, and will also take up the Copernicus Technical Operating Agreement with the European Space Agency. So this mirror site will be primarily managed by the Philippine Space Agency in coordination with other entities in the Philippines, including the Department of Science and Technology. Next slide, please. There are 7 possible pilot projects under the COPPIL program. First is land cover and forest monitoring that will allow automation of land cover mapping. There's benthic habitat monitoring, which is essential in detecting changes in coastal and marine habitats. Marine plastic monitoring, which is necessary for observing plastic litter floating in the ocean to detect sources and destinations. Corn monitoring, which will include mapping of corn growing areas and estimation of yield. Next slide. The 5th is ground motion monitoring, which is crucial in assessing ground subsidence, landslides, volcanic activity, and earthquakes. Flood mapping to compare the pre-flood satellite images with flood images. And lastly, among the proposed pilot projects is urban air quality monitoring to detect various greenhouse gases. Next slide. So, ladies and gentlemen, the Philippines has been building capabilities and infrastructure to support the effective implementation of programs like COPPIL. In the upstream, Filipino scientists and engineers build microsatellites such as the Diwata-1, Diwata-2, and Maya nanosatellites shown in this slide. These are operated through a network of ground stations located across the country. Data from these satellites combined with open satellite data from Copernicus, subscriptions from commercial satellites, and ground truth data are processed and analyzed by teams. They are distributed using data servers and high-performance computing facilities that are accessed by different institutions in the country and which are also connected to a national research education network that is also connected to the research education network in Europe. Altogether, this infrastructure enables and supports the country's space value chain, which is further enhanced to programs like COPPIL and its expansion under the EU Global Gateway Strategy. The Philippines positions itself to strengthen the use of space capabilities to facilitate climate observation, disaster risk assessment, early warning systems improvement, and data provision in support of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Sendai Framework, and commitments to the Paris Agreement. With ongoing efforts and the help of the COPPIL program, we're positive that the commitments made under the various agreements will bear fruit for the country, the region, and the world. Next slide, please. And in closing, I assure all of you of the Philippines' effort in the COPPIL program that will foster cooperation in support of the European Global Gateway objectives and digital connectivity. Once again, we thank Team Europe for the collaboration in recognizing gaps, strengths, and potentials in the Indo-Pacific region in space technology and applications, and the mobilization of resources for sustainable initiatives that will have lasting benefits for peace and prosperity of all. Thank you, and I wish everyone a productive and fruitful conference.
Thank you very much, sir. And now it's my great pleasure to turn to the main session and introduce the speakers for this session. So we have 3 eminent guests from Asia and Europe. Dr. Lurong Chen is the senior economist at Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, and also my esteemed colleague. And he has done extensive studies on the physical, institutional, and regulatory cooperation for digital connectivity in Southeast, East, and South Asia. And he has contributed several papers on Asia-Europe connectivity in digital economy. We have Miria Paulo. She's the head of the management at the Center for EU-Asia Connectivity at Ruhr University, Bochum. Miria has extensive experience in research, government relations, legal industry, and business relations between Asia and Europe and Asia and USA. And finally, we have Manuel Widman. He is the Mercator Fellow at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and has wide experience in institutional cooperation in the digital economy. Although today he speaks in his private capacity. So without further ado, may I ask Lu Rong to please start with his interventions.
Oh, thank you, Anita. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to join today's discussion about Asia-Europe cooperation in bridging regional interests and global challenges in digital connectivity. We must all agree that improving digital connectivity is fundamental for growth and development in a digital era. It will determine how well Asia and Europe can work together to unlock their potential and harness the advantage of the digital economy. As we note, along with technology progress and the changes of global economy and geopolitics, over time, there are more new factors, new concerns, and new challenges added to the concept of connectivity. Here, digital connectivity refers to not only the internet connection or people's connect to the internet, but also the way that the adoption of digital tools and related business models can facilitate people's connection and interaction with each other. A very fundamental issue here is data connectivity, which requires support from the so-called hub infrastructure, such as ICT network building and logistics, and the so-called soft infrastructure that will provide services and regulations to safeguard the free flow of data, capital, goods, services, and people also. Although technically we have seen that most barriers against data fraud have been effectively reduced, especially with the widespread of the smartphone use and the 4G or 5G networks. Improving Asia-Europe data connectivity still faces obstacles here and there stemming from the existence of development gaps, either across different countries or within the same country, but between urban and rural areas. And when we look at the developing parts of the regions, it is not unusual to see that the development of data-related infrastructure got impeded by the lack of capital, human skills, and technology know-how. But above all, the biggest challenge comes from the lack of trust. We can see the diffusion of ICT as a two-edged sword. On one side, digital adoption makes it much easier than ever before for all of us to access to information and use data online. But on the other side, it also increases the vulnerability of data leakage, stolen, or misuse. For that reason, there are increasing concerns about data accuracy, safety, and privacy protection. In response to this, international rule settings on data governance becomes urgently needed. This is, however, not an easy task. On the one hand, we don't want over-regulation on the market to discourage data flows and probably hinders innovative activities. And on the other hand, we also don't want a system of under-regulation that may destroy the market or affect its long-term dynamics, or even give birth to so-called online legal gray zones. Hereby, we suggest Asia-Europe cooperation in data connectivity to have at least two-step objective. It can first of all aim for a policy frameworks to promote the free flow of data, taking into considerable account of issues such as privacy, cybersecurity, and user protection. And then extensively, this Asia-Europe cooperation could pave the path towards an international consensus on regulating free flow of data with trust. In this regard, particularly from Asia's perspective, let me quickly touch upon two relevant concepts. One is people-to-people connection, and the other one is ASEAN centrality. First, we believe that people-to-people connectivity could be a main source of innovation and creativity, the ultimate driving force of the development of our human society. For instance, many people are talking about ChatGPT, and we know that the machine learning behind ChatGPT actually relies on big data preceded by an AI neural networks that brings together tens of thousands of computers or so-called workers to share tasks for deep learning. These workers do not have to be supercomputers, but once the network connects them up and let data flow among them, it unleashes some incredible potential. And its capacity grows along with the increase of the network scale and that of the size of the data set. And we can expect that improving people-to-people connectivity and increasing digital inclusiveness could generate some similar effect and unleash our potential of innovation. Second, about the ASEAN centrality, there are many countries in Asia and Europe. When we talk about Asia-Europe digital connectivity, it's actually the connectivity between all these countries. Setting rules and regulation on digital connectivity bilaterally seems inefficient and not practical. Instead, inter-regional cooperation seems to be a better approach, and for which respecting ASEAN centrality will be of particular help to facilitate talks and negotiations on Asia-Europe digital connectivity. With this, let me stop here. I'm looking forward to your comments and discussion. Thank you very much. Back to you, Anita.
Oh, thank you very much, Lurong, and thanks for keeping to the time. And this may be the right time to also announce that all the speakers get between 6 to 8 minutes, and after which we will have a question and answer session of about 20 minutes, because we lost a few minutes in the earlier part of the day. And participants are encouraged to leave their questions in the chat box, as well as mention the name of the speaker whom they would like to address their question. And last, we only encourage questions which are relevant to this session and the theme of the conference as a whole. Unrelated questions will be directed to the technical team for necessary addressal. With that, let me move on to Miria. Miria, please, we want to listen to you now.
Thank you very much, Anita. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you're listening. I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation and then move on to touch upon data governance, interoperability, and security with a particular focus on data flows. Since Mr. Chen already touched upon several elements, I will try to elaborate further. And then, but from a regulatory approach, particularly due to my legal background. Before moving directly to data flows, I would like to emphasize or highlight a few concepts. So one will be what we understand by data governance. So for example, based on the OECD definition, data governance refers to principles, policies, standards, laws, regulations, and agreements that are designed to control, manage, share, protect, and extract value from various types of data. And in that relation goes what is interoperability. So what we understand by that is the ability of smart technical components and systems to work together. And working together means that they can connect, understand to each other. They can share and use data between each other, while at the same time developing functions and services that can be provided to the end user, which means interoperability is composed by 5 layers. So physical, communication, information, data, functions and services, and business processes. Having that in mind, Mr. Jen also mentioned a little bit about data security or the threats and risks. I would like to emphasize or highlight that this concept is evolving and complex, and there is no common definition, especially depending on the areas and disciplines that you work. And these differences in understanding data generate challenges and complex environments to know when, what, how, which law and mechanisms to apply. And that we need to remind that data security has evolved from malicious activities early in the 80s to now criminal activities. And so these threats and risks are constantly increasing and affect us citizens, but also in great economic losses and national security. So those are very difficult on top of that to attribute and take place everywhere. So as a consequence, we can observe a tendency in securitization of data and the enhancing of data sovereignty. And with that, I would like to move to data flows. So today's digitized and global interconnected world is underpinned by the movement of data across borders. The global volume of data and the latency is constantly increasing, and new technologies obviously also benefit from this trend. Data flows support modern day economic and social interactions. For example, as Mr. Martiano was mentioned about the project COFIL, right? So address global challenges. But also digital data is considered a driver of development, economic growth, and innovation. In fact, the value of potential power and digital data was emphasized during the 4th UN Global Data Forum that took place recently in Hangzhou in China in April. So, however, all these positive elements, there is a discussions on data flows are sometimes very difficult and led to growing data flow regulation. So on the one hand, the economic and social dimension of data becomes a public policy priority as governments realize that the market forces alone are not sufficient to manage those risks. And on the other hand, the dependency and importance of data, as well as data flows, amplify challenges across a range of policy areas, which are very diverse, from regulatory to digital national security, trade, competition, industrial policy. As a result, there is a growing number of measures and that affect cross-border movement of data, which can be conditions of two, the flow of data or conditions of the storage of data. And these regulatory frameworks aim to promote or to protect national or regional interest, security, but also users' privacy and economic development. In addition, we are observing these geopolitical and geoeconomical dimensions with increasing tensions and economic competition among different stakeholders. So what is happening at the moment, while there are legitimate reasons for diversity on the regulation, the landscape has become increasingly complex. These divergences in data-related legislations approaches have significant implications. So one could be the harm of the public interest, because it is difficult for governments and for us individuals to understand what rules to apply and in what situation, but also for firms who actually face triple challenges, I would say, because one concern is the ability to internationalize, becoming more costly to operate in international markets, taking hard risks to adapt to different and new regulatory requirements, for example, new transparency rules for moderation. So firms face this pressure to navigate different regulations by focusing usually in complying with one side regulatory framework, which for large company may be easy to meet with multiple data requirements, but for SMEs, is quite difficult. A second challenge is the difficulty to safeguard the data that firms are supposed to transfer. So consumers' awareness of data security and safety of their personal data create a public awareness or the public pressure on firms to more transparent regarding the data management. And a third challenge for firms is the risk for sharing industrial data due to the deficiency of industry-wide data ecosystems and the difficulties of negotiating industry standards. This is obviously related also, I think Mr. Chen mentioned, that the lack of trust or the fear of losing competitiveness, obviously the security of deploying data sharing infrastructure. So as a result, interoperability problems may seem more predominant and the internet may look less inclusive. So what we see now is that government have been turning into a range of different instruments that aim to balance two elements: the flow of data and the safeguard of data. The range of instruments for cross-border data transfer is large, without getting into details now, but let me mention as a reference, we can highlight like 4 groups: the unilateral mechanisms, with things that we do domestically, or the plurilateral arrangements, things that we do internationally or intergovernmentally, trade agreements and partnerships, standard certificates, and technology-driving initiatives. So here a note, maybe setting the same level of data protection, sharing, and security is not a very simple task, especially for the enforcement. Perhaps we don't need only a single solution to all, but something that are under discussions. And with this, I would like to conclude with 3 key points, right? So there is a need to reconcile political, economic values and international commitments. Technology and digital services fast development require an equally fast response by taking advantage of existing instruments and mechanisms. And what is really important is to move further discussions that there is no one single mechanism that will enable the free flow of data with trust, but we should enhance commonalities that are found between and within these instruments. And in this regard, there are some areas that we could or should work together. But since my time is a bit up, I leave this for later on in the Q&A. So thank you very much for your attention.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thanks immensely, Maria. Very forensic insights there. And we'll come back to this in the later part of the session. And now it's my great pleasure to invite Manuel Widman to share his insights on today's theme. Manuel, please.
Hello, good morning and good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I actually brought a little PowerPoint that I would like to share with you. All right, I think now it should be visible. Yeah, thanks again for having me on this panel. Just again, the disclaimer, I'm speaking here on my private capacity as a Mercator Fellow, not on behalf of my current employer. But I'm immensely happy to be at this panel this morning or this afternoon, because it's about regional interests and overcoming them or bridging them, and like with this, overcoming global challenges. And considering that this is a conference on Europe and Asia, it's more than natural that we mainly focus on these 2 actors when we talk about regional interests. But I have the feeling at some point we sometimes forget that with the cooperation, or that the cooperation of Europe and Asia also has implications on other regions in the world that are maybe currently not as present in the global discourse. And this is why I would like to use the chance of my little input at the beginning of this 2-day conference to invite you on a journey that analyzes or looks at Europe and Asia cooperation from a slightly different angle. An angle or a perspective that was informed by my recent work in East Africa, and specifically in Kenya, and an angle that will come up with the question or lead to the question how the cooperation between Europe and Asia can really shape the global discourse on digital connectivity. And allow me to start my presentation with a quote that I think by now everybody has heard, especially since the uprise of artificial intelligence: data is the new oil. And this is just not simply a saying or a quote, it is also reflected in actual numbers. According to the World Bank, right now 15% of our GDP is based on the digital economy, which in turn is driven by data. And in the next 10 years, according to the World Economic Forum, about 70% of the newly created economic value will be based or will be derived from digitally enabled platform businesses, which in turn, and again, are fueled by data as their most precious resource. But now, if we have a look at where this precious resource, the oil, if you want to say so, is actually located or flowing, then research shows that about 90% of data flows happens within national borders. And with this, also the data value creation and most importantly, the data value capture. And these data flows right now predominantly happen within the borders of rather industrialized nations or regions. I'm thinking of the EU, for example, or in Asia. I'm thinking of digital frontrunners such as Singapore, South Korea, China, or Japan. And with all this data residing in rather industrialized nations, developing nations or developing regions desperately need data sharing in order to economically and digitally develop. Well, now the good news is that in the recent years, we can observe a global trend that moves away from data localization rather to the free flow of data with trust that has been already quite extensively and well introduced by my fellow panelists, which is basically the notion or a concept enabling cross-border data flow. And within this discourse, or the concept which was actually introduced by Japan, we really see the EU and Asia in the global lead, shaping the global discourse and taking this discussion into formats just right now, at least from an African perspective. What I can tell is that African countries remain strongly marginalized in this discourse. For example, there's a working group in the WTO on e-commerce that deals exactly with these data flows. Only 6 African countries are represented in this working group. And the African group of the WTO, while welcoming the discourse on data flows as such, because as I just mentioned, they really need the data sharing, they criticize the format. Why? It's because they are afraid that in between all those digital heavyweights, again, EU, South Korea, Japan, Singapore, and all their interests, and also the geopolitical dimension that data undoubtedly has, they're afraid that their developmental aspects or developmental interests get lost and marginalized. And as a coping strategy, at least what I've witnessed in Kenya, is that these countries then try to enhance data sharing on a bilateral level. This could, for example, happen through a bilateral free trade agreement. Now, the problem with these free trade agreements is a bit that, on the one hand, depending on the negotiations, the power imbalance might be quite strong, leading to potentially unfavorable terms to the developing country that, in its worst case, can actually lead to data extraction from the developing country to the digital heavyweight. So if you want to stick with the data equals oil comparison, in the worst case, we are extracting again oil from developing states. And on the other hand, with those bilateral approaches, it was also already mentioned by Mr. Chen, we are risking a regulatory patchwork on a global level, which, especially if we look at regions, can be quite harmful, because it will be extremely difficult for regions such as Africa to build up a coherent digital single market jointly grow, leapfrog the digital development, and participate in the growing digital economy in a fair and equitable manner. Nevertheless, data is our chance. This was one of the sentences I heard the most when working with Kenyan governmental agencies or Kenyan private sector or civil society actors. Data is really our chance. And I think it is our obligation now that we start this two-day conference on EU or Europe-Asia cooperation and digital connectivity, that we think of the chances ahead, not only for us, for our two regions, but also for other regions that are maybe underrepresented in the global discourse right now. And where I would really like to see Europe-Asia cooperation on digital connectivity heading towards is a cooperation where EU and Asia really lead the global discourse towards inclusivity and thereby, trying to create a digital future where nobody is left behind and where everybody can participate in an equal and fair manner. And with this little input or journey, I would like to go back to you, Anita, and looking forward to the discussion. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you very much, Emmanuel. Thanks immensely for bringing up the dilemma before developing Asia and indeed Africa too, because the issues are rather common and relevant from the EU-Asia cooperation perspective. And I thank all my three speakers for their wonderful discipline in keeping to the time. However, we still have to squeeze our question and answer session to roughly about 15 minutes because of the early loss of a few minutes, but the minutes which we lost earlier. So we had encouraged our participants to put up their questions in the chat function. However, so far, I have not been able to see any question from the audience, which makes my task double-edged now. But rest assured, I had formed a few questions of mine own for the three speakers. So I come back to you again, Lurong, and ask you this. You have worked extensively on the issues before developing Asia, and more specifically, the ASEAN experience. So please tell us, is ASEAN the best place to work upon the Asia-Europe digital connectivity, given ASEAN's homework on ICT master plan? Or should Asia-Europe cooperation look at individual performers like Vietnam, China, India? And what about the developed economies in Asia, say Japan and Korea? Where are the avenues for cooperation? And more specifically, Lurong, since both you and I have worked on this at the shallow ends of the river, is Indo-Pacific the new platform for cooperation over digital connectivity between Asia and Europe? Lurong, your thoughts, please.
Thank you, Anita. That's a very big question. First of all, for Asia, whether it's a good partner to talk about digital connectivity, the answer is definitely yes. We know that Asian countries are very fancy, try to find all ways to promote the development of digital economy, realizing that this is actually the precious opportunity for them to catch up or to accelerate their social transformation. So, and whether we should look at Asia as a group or individual countries, and I think related to this question, I remember a few years ago, there's a publication actually by you and Professor Hauck from New Zealand, used a concept called value chain connectivity. So if we adopt that concept in our discussion here, then we should realize that each country's interest on digital connectivity actually related to their position in the global
In the
value
global
chain.
value chains, yes.
Yeah, so when we find an international consensus, we should realize those countries' specific interests because of their specific development stage and development interests. So with this understanding, actually, this is the kind of provide a precondition for country to come together and to find a kind of a common floor to talk about how we can facilitate data flows and at the same time make sure that we provide a fair competition environment and also provide enough support or protection to our consumers and users. For this Asia-Europe thing, cooperation in this area, I think this ASEAN centrality need to be we need to bear in mind, and this is also applied when we think about small developing countries in Asia, how they are going to deal similar issues with countries like Japan and Korea or China. It's the same logic will apply to solve all this situation. But above all, I think when we talk about digital connectivity or any issue related to this digital economy, I think mindset change is the very critical part. So in Asia, we see that for many policymakers, they already changed their mindset, keep open-minded to all approach that might support the digital development. And we would like to see this also occurred in other parts of the world. Yeah, thank you, Anita.
Yes, thanks, Laurent. Very well put, and reminding me of my own study in which you also participated. Indeed, the purpose here really is digital connectivity for what? Is it for greater participation in the economy per se, or in the digital economy of the future, enhancing the competitiveness of the countries, especially the smaller countries? So yeah, very well taken, your point, Laurent. Then may I come back to you, Miria, with a question very much related to your presentation, of course. As you are aware, besides physical infrastructure, data trust and data governance, you very well explained to us, these are central to all international cooperation for digital connectivity. Now, given the differences in digital capacities of economies in Asia, and I mean both physical and institutional infrastructure perspective, so how can a unified EU position on data governance and flow of data across borders be beneficial to Asia, especially in the context of Asia-Europe cooperation, which has digital connectivity as a very important pillar of the program of cooperation between the two regions? So can we have some more explanation on the unified EU position on data governance and free flow of data with trust? Miria.
Right. Well, first of all, the EU's role, I mean, already the first keynote mentioned about the EU's position in data connectivity and digital connectivity, right? In this regards, we have to understand that for the EU's digital connectivity is founded in this rules-based approach, or the European way, or the normative element with this Brussels effect, right? And deeper into with values and digital transformation as part of what some may call EU's strategic autonomy or technological autonomy, right? But digital economy has more importantly become political objective of the EU's approach to data governance, right? So Brussels pursues a global leadership position in digital space, and policymakers and regulators work together to develop also the political but the regulatory frameworks to boost digital economic growth and innovation. And an example for this, we could mention, for example, the 2030 Digital Compass, right, that aim to establish international partnerships and focus mainly on the 4 pillars of infrastructure, skills, digital transformation, for businesses and digitization of public services. And within those partnerships, we have the digital partnerships as bilateral cooperation, unilateral mechanisms. And we have seen, for example, the one with Japan and the Republic of Korea, which, by the way, also have in the area of data and data governance, the adequacy decision. Nowadays, we are discussing with the Singapore and the digital trade agreement and the digital partnership, right? So in all these partnerships are designed to address strategic sectorial areas such as cyber security resilience or emerging technologies or digital infrastructure, as mentioned before by Mr. Chen Har, and the soft one. And the Global Gateway somehow gives this overarching aim, right, or the overall framework and investment in digital infrastructure development, and particularly related to data-driven economy and societies, is a key pillar, right? And in that sense, we can see also the investments in digital networks and infrastructure on fiber optic cables and enhancing these data flows. But it's also related to data centers, right? And this also the establishment of those centers links very well with the twin transformation that usually is called in the Brussels Parliament. So this have the data center are linked to, for example, when we build the infrastructure, right, that the climate is, if it's cold and dry, then we have less consumption and electricity. And so therefore that links to geopolitical and geoeconomic dimensions, or digital geoeconomic and geopolitical dimensions, and where to locate those centers, and then who controls them, or how we manage them, right? That also links obviously to security in terms of the infrastructure with submarine cables, right? And then we have in the region also an kind of a shift to, for example, overland cables more with China or Russia. But then in the south, we have more the sub cables, right? And actually in the keynote, it was mentioned again, the project in Philippines. So I think in this regards, and coming back to my presentation more into the instruments, the regulatory instruments. So I would like to highlight that the EU also has a strong or important role to play when it comes to take discussions further to find those commonalities in those instruments, right? Because we have also at the EU level these unilateral mechanisms that enable, for example, the transfer for certain types of data abroad under certain conditions. And for example, we can see the pre-authorized safe words or the open safe words, depending if it's public or private. And here we have the commonality for adequacy and conditions of contracts in both open and pre-authorized safe words. We also have the foundation for enabling further discussions when it comes to plurilateral arrangements, right? So for example, the trade agreements and the partnerships or digital partnerships incorporate nowadays more data flows provisions. And this is quite relevant because although in the beginning we see a transition, for example, from 2006 with no binding provisions, from 2014 we see a more binding tendency, right? So that is also part of the capabilities or resources that the EU could contribute and regulatory. I was thinking now, for example, in a specific with the digital signatures or the EDIS regulation, or for example, with certification, right? But we could further elaborate later.
Yeah. Okay. This is very captivating, and one could have a separate session on this altogether, Birya. But yes, I agree with you. And Helena also mentioned this in some detail in her keynote today, that EU also has the all-important issue of bringing societal values and inclusivity into its digital policies. And that is something because there are a lot of participants here from Asia who are participating today. And with this sort of clarity, both on technical infrastructure and value-based societal norms. So that brings more clarity to this today's debate that we are having. Thank you very much, Miriam. And finally, I have one last question for Manuel. Tell me, Manuel, I'm working very closely with the G20 this year, the India presidency, and I'm privy to the several difficulties in the working group for trade and economy in bridging the divide over digital cooperation. So what can you tell us about consensus, if any, say in the G7 process over data governance, or any other major plurilateral group that you have experience about? And also tell us, Manuel, from this conference's theme and perspective, are these bodies, G7, G20, are they even the optimal platform to discuss data governance, given the aspirations of Asia and Europe for their participation in digital economy? And more specifically, how can Asia and Europe cooperation platform be modulated to serve our own interests in digital connectivity? Manuel, your thoughts, please.
Thanks a lot for the very big question, and
Sorry.
as much as I would like to solve the whole discourse, I'm afraid I won't do it, or I can't do it, because it's a lengthy process that requires ongoing conversations. But I think what you just touched upon is crucial. It's the consensus, and I think, at least from my perspective, there is a global consensus that data sharing with trust is a necessity for everybody, for every country in the world. And I think this is a good starting point. I also see that there is a necessity to discuss it in multiple formats and multiple forums, considering that different regions, different nations have different interests and also different requirements when it comes to digital development. So I wouldn't necessarily narrow it down to one certain fora that I would say, okay, this is the platform where this global issue is discussed. I think there needs to be a variety of formats, of course, always interlinked with each other. And I think the most important thing is that we really get to the point where we discuss this issue with relevant partners all around the world, and with a seriosity that we really want to include them into the decision-making process, and not come up with regulations and a blueprint and then say, here you go, this is what you have to somehow adapt to, but that we take them into the process and that we already make the process of discussion inclusive, or as inclusive as possible. I know it's a difficult task, but at least that should be our goal and our aspiration as we come together and discuss aspects such as data connectivity or digital connectivity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much, Manuel. I had several other issues on my mind, but now may be a good time to end this session. And I've been asked by the technical team to announce that there's going to be a 15 minutes break. Now, I'm not sure whether we can exactly stick to 15 minutes or is it 10 minutes, but I will let the technical team to take care of that. But regardless, there will be a break now before we start the second part of today's proceedings, which Rosanna will moderate. So perhaps the technical team may like to make some announcement here.